Today's webinar is being presented by Reagan Roth Fitzgerald. Reagan serves as a consultant to the Behavioral Services Department at the Johnson Center. She earned her bachelor's degree in psychology and Spanish from the University of Texas at Austin and has a master's degree in special education with an emphasis in autism intervention from the University of North Texas. She is a board-certified behavior analyst with over 12 years of experience. She has had the opportunity to work with children on the autism spectrum from ages 18 months through adolescence. She has served as a moderator for a social skills group for teenagers with Asperger's syndrome, worked as an in-home ABA therapist and consultant in Texas and California, and was a case manager at an inclusive private preschool. In addition, she has served as the only behavior analyst in one of the largest school districts in Texas, where she oversaw the district's first implementation of applied behavior analysis. Reagan, in conjunction with Studio Movie Grill, initiated a program to host private screenings for children with special needs and their families, a program that is now offered at all Detroit, Fort Worth, and Houston Studio Movie Grill locations and is now expanding nationwide. Reagan is an active member in many professional organizations and has presented many workshops and presentations at various regional and national conferences. Before we begin the presentation, please note that questions can be typed into your control panel throughout the presentation, and time permitting, they will be addressed at the end. Also, for those of you that have requested copies of the presentation, we cannot send out the presentation slides. However, we do post recordings of all of our free webinars on the Johnson Center YouTube channel. Please search for us on YouTube and subscribe to get full access to all of our recorded webinars. We are currently offering certificates of attendance for this webinar, and a link to complete a short quiz will be emailed to you following the presentation. Now please welcome our presenter, Reagan.
Hello. Today I'm here to speak to everyone about how to make learning fun. Basically, this is an overview, and I want to, emphasize that it's an overview of naturalistic teaching strategies, which are found to be very effective in learning and motivation and helping a learning environment to be a fun place and not seem, so much like work, because we know that a lot of our children that are in ABA programs or in ABA schools are young, because we're trying to intervene early. And so the more that we have young students and young children that we're working with, it's more important every day that we make this learning environment fun and not work and demanding. So, to begin, learning can be fun. We're talking about teaching in the natural environment. NLP is the natural language paradigm, and this includes two different teaching approaches. There's the incidental teaching and the pivotal response treatment. Both of these, when you're teaching in the natural environment, help to increase motivation. We do things like varying the tasks. We increase our responding through using really direct natural reinforcers. We can increase our generalization through teaching with a loose structure and multiple exemplars. In the natural environment, though, we still use our behavior principle techniques, the shaping, prompting, fading, errorless teaching. The main difference is that we are just capitalizing on natural opportunities. So it's very child-led, which is an important piece and the most important piece. Each teaching opportunity that we provide in the natural environment is a discrete trial. So it is using the discrete trial teaching that most people have heard of and been learning about, but the difference is it uses a discrete trial in the sense that it has a discriminative stimulus as your antecedent, and it has a behavior and a consequence, but it is incorporating other certain natural techniques into these discrete trials rather than doing that drilling, that one-on-one at a table drilling type of teaching. This is especially helpful if we think about that, our general education curriculum at this point has not been able to teach many of our children that are in special education, And so we've learned that in special education, we use special techniques, but we also know that all of these techniques are beneficial to all children, and that is the same with our natural environment teaching. So when I talk about incidental teaching, I'm basically discussing the systematic way of planning of instruction, but in the natural environment context, where we're going to actually need the response. So it makes our environment a natural teacher. And that's what really everyone learns from their natural environment. That's what we do. And that's what, we pick up on things that the antecedents and the consequences that are signaling certain behaviors and maintaining different behaviors. And we learn that. It's learned behavior. A lot of the children with autism that we work with that might not be learning from their natural environment, but that doesn't mean they can't learn in their natural environment. They just need it to be structured and planned for lots of repetition in the natural environment. Basically, we are going to talk a lot about how we can closely approximate the way our natural children are learning language, but we're going to make it more intense. We're going to have a natural setting that provides the context so that responding can come under control of the natural environment and all stimuli in that environment. And that's spread across, all environments and people. So it's just as many hours of teaching in naturalistic teaching as it is in discrete trial teaching, but the difference is that it is going to be maybe a little bit more creativity is involved, a little more planning in advance. It's a little bit more difficult for probably your average layperson to create and to pick up on these different opportunities, but it's still going to take just as much teaching time. It's just going to be more fun. Pivotal response treatment is incidental teaching with certain techniques or elements being incorporated. And the main important part, that the word pivotal, the reason that's in there is because this is viewed as assisting a child in learning a wide array of skills. So you're going to teach the pivotal skills that can then lead to picking up from the natural environment and learning more and more every day, versus having to teach every single specific skill that that an individual would need to know, because it's endless, right? We learn endlessly. Within incidental teaching, you're going to want to arrange a setting containing lots of materials that are of interest to the child. That is going to be essential. So everything that you do is going to be arranged ahead of time, and you're going to have to really have a lot of things that are as much as you can, and you might have to condition new things to be reinforcing and motivating and of interest to a child. We wait for the child to initiate an interaction with an object of interest or about an object of interest, and that's our signal that this is a teachable moment. That the child initiation is the overt act or interest in something. So we want to teach when the child is showing that they are interested. That's when we want to capture and contrive lots of opportunities. So we will, so for example, you might, when a child is wanting to get to something or access an item that they want, you might block them from gaining access to it naturally, or you might want to move your positioning. You want to make it where they basically can't access whatever that is until the language is demonstrated that's needed. And then once it is identified and they give the information or the language you need, then you're going to give them access. So so your first point is really going to be identifying the interest, because once you've identified the child's interest, you can then manipulate and arrange for whatever behavior you're trying to teach or language you're trying to promote. You can arrange for that to be motivating to do, and you can prompt whatever language that is, whether it's a request for an item or it is you're teaching adjectives and you want to prompt the adjective of the item. You're tagged a label of it, you can manipulate and arrange for that. You can set the objects that a student might be interested in, and you can set them out of reach but in view. And things like this are ways that you're arranging it so that you can gain lots of opportunities to prompt the behavior that you are looking for. You also, once you give access to the item, then you're going to want to give specific behavior praise really quickly and access to the item at the same time. You're teaching them what is functional. Incidental teaching is used a lot with language. It's definitely a type of teaching that's going to increase that language because language is a pivotal skill. But it also, we can teach self-help skills, we can work on social skills and academics. Many different areas can be taught with incidental teaching. We can be asking for more elaborate language, or we can be asking for summations to certain words. But then we're going to be making sure that we are providing whatever that is, the motivation, contingent upon the child initiating towards it. If we have to push the initiation, then we are not necessarily capturing that opportunity and following the child's lead. So here is a can you see? I'm trying to see. Am I trying to get rid of this? Okay, so here what you can see is this is a little, I guess, diagram to show how you're going, what the order is, the contingency. You've got your child's interest, and that leads to your teaching materials, which then those teaching materials become your rewards. The teaching materials, you're not having materials and then delivering a cookie. If the cookie is what was the item of interest, then that's your teaching material as well. So the interest is your child's desire. The teaching materials, you're going to use it for teaching. And then in your teaching, once they perform the behavior that you're wanting to see, you're going, items you were using for teaching are going to become your SR+, that's your positive reinforcement, your reward. And the reason it becomes a reinforcer and increases the behavior. Reinforcers are something that, if you're not sure and need a refresher, something that follows a behavior, but it's going to increase the probability of that behavior occurring again. So if we're using certain materials to teach language, for example, because that's the material or the item that a child wants, then we can, in addition, use that, give access to that item as the after they perform that behavior, and we'll hopefully be increasing the probability of that language being used again in the future. And so that's how it becomes a positive reinforcer. Now, what we could do this sitting at a table, because for sure, let's say a child wanted a cookie, you could put a cookie on a table, and they see the cookie, and then you prompt them to say cookie, and then you give them the cookie. But what we're talking about doing more is we're not sitting at a table setting it up. We're actually, it's snack time, we're going into walking by the kitchen, and there's a cookie out, and they see the cookie. And that, as they're walking towards the cookie themselves, that's our cue that they're interested and that there's the desire there. And then we teach in that moment. Okay. Now, many times what we're working on, or the language or the behavior that we're trying to teach, is not something in the child's repertoire yet. They're not doing it. So it's kind of like, okay, well, I can put all these items out there that are of interest, and I can say I'm going to give it to them as a reward, but how do I get them to do what it is that I want them to do? the behavior I'm trying to reward, the language or the skill? Well, we're going to prompt. The child's interest or initiation that you see is what's going to determine the timing of your prompt. So when you see that initiation, that's when you're going to prompt. You want to establish what we call joint attention, which is the child, if it's language and communication, we want them to realize that they're going to, whatever you're prompting, you're going to have them say to you. They're directing it to another individual for communication. So as soon as you get that joint attention and you're both looking at this same item, now you can present a model, a gesture, a vocal prompt, something to prompt the individual to do what it is that they would need to do in that moment, whatever it is you're working on. You want to make that responding easy and fun, which means you want to prompt as much as necessary and then fade your prompts. The teacher, that whoever it is that's working with the child, you can plan for prompting. You can have an agenda. Now, definitely things are going to change. Things are not going to go exactly as planned, but you have an order, a timing of how, or a sequence of how you're going to fade your prompts ahead of time. You know where the student is at and what you see what kind of prompt is effective and what they needed last time. And then when you restate this opportunity, or you see the opportunity arise again, you know where to prompt because you know what the last prompt was that where you were at. So it's a lot of planning ahead of time. There's also another way that you can prompt is by using a time delay. So what we do with that is you're prompting initially right when they give that interest in an item, and that's what you do when they don't have the skill yet. But as they see what it is that they're supposed to be doing and what you're trying to get them to do and teach them to do, you gradually put a little bit of time in there in between the noting the interest and prompting. And so you're almost giving the student, the child, that moment when they notice it and the interest. You're going to give them that brief time to come up with what that is that they had done last time that you helped them do, to do that on their own. And if they don't, you're going to, and if once they do, then you gradually start to increase that time delay in there more and more. Once you are prompting and the behavior is there and it's exhibited in the repertoire, well, then you're going to start to fade that prompt. And that is how you're going to start to, maybe it's you're reducing your physical or gestural prompt, or you're reducing your vocal prompt and model, but you've got to make sure that you fade it out, or else you become part of that, that behavior. And so in the natural environment, which is our whole point in this, we're not going to see that generalization or that functional use if we don't fade out that prompt appropriately. Let's see, we could talk about this in terms of, so an example for this would maybe be if you know requesting or manding language. When I want a child, they see something they like with the cookie I was mentioning, they want that. You've got the children who might climb on the counter and climb over this and up that just to get what they want because they don't have the language or using the language and directing it towards someone before gaining access to the item. So they're finding ways on their own to access it. Well, in the natural environment, we would want to prompt that vocal language of that request and then help them gain access to that item or allow them to gain their independent access at that point. Now, the next time that we see that cookie out there, hopefully, if we fade out our prompts, it's going to signal to that individual that, oh, I'm going to ask for that. And then you can start to do that whenever you see their interest in anything. And that is where they start to see the pivotal skill of when I want something, I use these words and ask for it. But let's say you were working on receptive labeling. You could sit at a table in discrete trial teaching and lay out cards and say, point to the ball, and the student points to the ball. And you prompt it, and you fade your prompts, and there's no way that we're really working at this point on the child being able to use that identification that they've learned in other environments, in other times when they really need it. So with receptive labeling, it might be that they see, you're playing with cars and there's, you're having fun and you're doing cars on a ramp and you're pushing them really fast, and then you ask them, what is this? And they say car, or you prompt them to say car, and then you might let the car roll down the ramp if that's what they really like to do. So a lot of the fun activities within the cars are contingent upon the response of the receptive label that you're working on. And so that's very different than looking at some cards and then having to generalize those pictures of those cards to a car, and then having to generalize to a play environment, when you could do all of those things in one setting. Some of the strategies that we'll want to use in this arrangement of the environment is, yes, again, as I said, having materials and objects of interest to the student. That's going to be essential, is having those available. But also having items out of reach. Lots of times I recommend that if you can keep items out of reach but in view, in sight, then you're going to be giving the child opportunities to see what they like, to see that interest, to do a behavior to show that they're interested. You're setting it up where there's a need to speak and a function out of the language to get those items. You want to control access to those desired items. You also might have something available that you're playing with and you give inadequate proportions, or portions of it. So maybe you're sitting down to play Play-Doh and you're just playing with Play-Doh, and you want to work on requesting, then you're going to give maybe a little bit of Play-Doh, and the kid's going to want to make something, and they're trying, and they just don't have enough, and they look over at the tub, and that look is how you know, wow, they want more. So then you can prompt them to say, I would like the Play-Doh, or Play-Doh, whatever language ability they're at. It might even be just to exchange an icon, a little picture of Play-Doh, whatever it may be that their language, whatever language they're using is whether it's vocal or not, that's what you're going to be able to have lots of opportunities, because you could give more of that Play-Doh. And then they might start to play with it, and they look over at that bin again because they know there's more, and you only gave them a little bit. So that's where you're going to get that discrete trial teaching repetition, but in a more natural setting. Also, a lot of choice making. That's an environmental arrangement that we want to make sure there is that we are opening the environment up for choice after choice after choice. Students will initiate more when there are materials of interest to them, especially our children with autism. So once you identify these materials that are of interest, you can then manipulate or arrange the environment by doing these choice making and inadequate proportions and out of reach, putting things out of reach. You can do all of that and manipulate, arrange, and plan ahead of time so that they only access the things they want after the targeted behavior, not by dropping to the floor and crying, or by, oh, I learned I get cookies when I point to the right picture on the table. No, I get cookies when I use my words. Another way that we tend to do this is putting toys on rotation. This is extremely important for novelty, for the motivation, for satiation, to avoid satiation. I give an example actually with my dog a lot, that I had my dog I got as a puppy, and I can honestly say that the dog never has chewed up anything, ever, ever, ever. And I attribute it 100% to the fact that I had this dog's toys on rotation. I would have a few toys out in the bin that she could go and get and play with, and everything else was in a closet. And every week or so, I would take those toys that are out and I'd pull out a few more and put them out. And then a few weeks later, I'd rotate again. And for the whole 8 years this dog was alive, I never really bought toys ever again. After the very beginning, I bought the 5 or 10 toys I had and never had to buy anything again because I kept them on rotation, and they kept that strength, that deprivation that makes, and the novelty. And so then I did that when I had children. I did the same thing. They might have had Bristol blocks and Legos and another, like the Duplo blocks. And so there's all these different blocks. Rather than just having them all in a bin and they're all there and they're always there for them to see, I keep some of them in a closet and I keep some of them out. And I regularly switch them around. So there's always this new novel toy. So I didn't have to buy a lot of things all the time. And you could do that with our children's interest as well, no matter how small of a wide array of interests there are. A lot of times we arrange non-preferred activities in order to teach appropriate protests. You've got a kid that's something, you present them with something they don't like and they drop to the floor and they start screaming or they hit or no, if we can arrange to present them with non-preferred activities rather than just waiting for the opportunity for it to occur, and that way we're prepared to prompt in that natural environment the appropriate way to say that you don't want something. And then you can remove that item as the reinforcement. And they see, oh, when I say I don't like this, it's being removed. We also want to almost act like we are forgetful about their nonverbal communication. Now, we're not going to be, because we're looking at that nonverbal communication as their interest. And that's how we're going to know that, this is of object of interest to the student and that I should capitalize on this environment. But we don't let them know and show them that that nonverbal communication means anything to us. And the way that we do that is we don't say things like, oh, do you want this? You wanted this? I saw you wanted this, when you see them walking to something. Because now they know, oh, she'll understand me as long as I keep walking towards items. So you have to make sure that you are using that as the cue to set up this opportunity and capitalize on it versus using that as their communication. You can also encourage students to initiate language by creating situations where they need help. So if you know there's things that they have difficulty with, or you know that something's going to take lots of items like a scissors and a glue and a this and a that, and you only give them certain items, well, they're going to need other items, they're going to need help, so they're going to then be able to have the opportunity for you to prompt that language at that time in the natural situation. Here's a little chart where we can look and compare the differences of discrete trial teaching and incidental teaching. With discrete trial teaching, it is teacher initiated. So you're not waiting to see what the child's interests are at that time and following their lead and then trying to teach whatever skill it is that you're working on within that moment. You're like, oh, I'm going to work on receptive labels. And you initiate that we're doing receptive labels, and you sit down and you do that program. That's very different than in the natural environment. I can capture opportunities to teach a receptive label when we're in the car. I can capture that opportunity outside on a walk. I can capture that opportunity going on the slide at the park, sitting at the table for dinner, all of these different ways. In discrete trial teaching, there can be unrelated rewards. So we could be doing matching of pictures, and the reward could be a chip. Where in incidental teaching, the materials and the rewards are related to the activity. So if you're playing with cars, you can incorporate matching into the car activity using the cars, and then use those same cars as the reward. District trial teaching, you can arrange your environment for them to attend. But in incidental teaching, a lot of times we're arranging the environment for their initiation versus us initiating and then getting the attendance to it, to what we're doing. In discrete trial teaching, we reward target behavior, where in incidental teaching, we are not only going to reward the best answer that we're looking for. We are going to reward approximations. That's what we call it when it's on the right track. We're shaping in the natural environment. And that's why it might take a lot of trials, like I said earlier, because you are rewarding approximations. And you're basically, by doing that, you're increasing the desire and the motivation to engage with you and to learn. Because it's not as much of a work environment. They're getting rewarded with access to all these things that they're showing interest in by their approximation, by trying the effort. And in discrete trial teaching, when it comes to generalization, you many times have to arrange for that generalization. You have to go get different examples. You have to set it up at the table to teach this, and then you teach another one, and I teach another one. So if I'm teaching car, I teach this car, and once it's mastered, I teach another car, where in incidental teaching, it's actually built in. The generalization is built into the activities. You don't have to take something you learn at the table and then go teach it again in a play environment. You actually, or you don't teach them to ask for a car sitting at the table with it in front of them and then go teach them to ask for the car when you're playing cars with a friend. You're actually building the teaching into that play environment from the beginning. So you could actually do all of your teaching in your normal daily activities and play, within play. I talked a little bit earlier about the child-led, and that might be adult-directed. I want to make sure that we're clear. It still could be directed, but its continuation of an activity is contingent on engaging in other behaviors. The activity continuation is the reinforcer for the incidental activity. All that really is important that you need to remember, though, is that a high probability of engagement or continuation of an activity reinforces lower probability behavior, like what you're teaching them. So, for example, if you are brushing your teeth and you're not going to give the toothbrush until answering, "What is this?" then what you are doing is you are, if they're wanting that toothbrush, you are reinforcing the lower probability behavior, which is answering, saying what this is, by having the toothpaste and the toothbrush to brush your teeth. As long as the attention's there and it's related at all, the response you want to reinforce, because you want to be increasing the engagement, the desire, the motivation. Part of what we're teaching with incidental teaching is just the motivation to engage and to communicate. So the way we do that is by reinforcing all attempts. Okay, the next, PRT, Pivotal Response Treatment. I mentioned this earlier. This is where you're incorporating your goals that you're working on into natural activities. So you could be teaching academic curriculum, but you're teaching it in a natural activity throughout the day. You're going to be interspersing activities basically all day rather than sitting one-on-one at a table for 20 minutes. So this is very helpful in like a parent training type of situation, something we can teach parents to use all day, and you're implementing applied behavior analysis all day versus saying I have a 2-hour session from 4 to 6. You're implementing it all day. That's a lot more intensity than just a 2-hour session. More initiations have resulted through PRT, and this has proven to show that there's better outcomes of communication. We have better outcomes in academics, decreases in repetitive behavior, and increase in play behavior, and also a decrease in disruptive behavior while increasing engagement. This has all been proven and shown through PRT because we're practicing and focusing on these pivotal areas rather than specific individual targets. Motivation, language, those are all pivotal areas. You're gaining collateral changes in targeted areas, so it's building and snowballing. And this is also a very useful technique and intervention in inclusion and inclusive settings. So if you're, you've got your student that you're insisting, you really want this inclusion time, well, we like to remind people that inclusion isn't just being in a room with people. It's actually gaining and learning from your environment and those peers around you. And the way we can increase that in inclusion is by incorporating these techniques. So some of the pivotal areas that we like to focus on are motivation, responding to multiple cues. So that is basically where, when you're tuning into something, to your environment, you can't just focus on one part of the environment. Every part of the environment, all the aspects of stimuli are going to affect your responses. And so we need to make sure that, somebody doesn't learn a picture, let's say, of a dog, that this is a dog and they know this picture's a dog, but the reason it might not be generalizing to other dogs is because all they were cueing into on this picture was the mouth of the dog. And then you go see another dog and it has a different mouth. Well, right now, they were only cueing in to certain cues. We want our children to respond to all the cues and start to synthesize them together and know that when it's these cues all together, it's this. And when these cues are together, it's this. It's a combination. We work on self-initiations. Self-management. This affects everything throughout our day. And we can all probably be improving in self-management, but that's something that's a very pivotal area. And empathy. Some of those deeper joint attention type skills where you are learning that attention and attending to the fact that, that theory of mind, where that we're all experiencing these same things, and I'm looking at something and you're looking at something and it might look different to us, but we're all a part of our environment together, and that theory of mind is something else that is very applicable in PRT. When I talk about initiations, what I'm meaning is things like question asking, initiating socially to peers, initiating attending. Our children can be very compliant sometimes, but yet they're compliant because they're waiting for the teacher direction. And everything they do is teacher directed, and they need that almost as a prompt, that instruction or that directive. It becomes a prompt. Well, we want our students and our children to start initiating on their own versus waiting for the teacher. Some of the techniques that are going to be involved in PRT. Child attention. Got to have attention from the child, a clear instruction, an appropriate and uninterrupted attention is very important. We want to always be interspersing maintenance. So for example, if you're playing with cars with your child and you're working on looking at you, when you want them to, when you want the child to look at you to get your attention to watch them put the car down the ramp. Well, at that point, if you did 50 opportunities of that in a row, it's going to become not fun. And what do we want to do? We want our learning to be fun. So we are going to intersperse things that are easy. We might do that one of looking at you before the car rolls down the ramp, and then we might just have them crash the cars, because that's something that they've already done, and we don't have them look at us, and we're just modeling and they're imitating. And so we're interspersing things that they can do with the things that we're capitalizing on. Shared control is where a child has a role in choosing the stimulus that you're going to be using or the materials, while the teacher still has scheduled plans and activities. So I might have a plan of what we're going to work on, and I know my prompting levels, and I know that I'm going to incorporate it into this play environment, and I'm going to watch the child's lead. But what the child has is the role in choosing by showing the interest of what we're going to be using and exactly which items and things are of interest to them. So that gives them that control. And whenever you have some sort of control in something, you are going to have more, you're going to learn more, you're going to be more engaged. We can also learn to incorporate these techniques into many different situations, but we want to make sure that our multiple cues that we want our children to attend to are appropriate for the child's developmental level. Because if you don't know anything about the child development level, then you might be expecting too much and then not have success. You want to make sure that there's contingency, that your reinforcement is contingent upon the approximation to the desired behavior. You want to reinforce those attempts, and there has to be a direct relation between the response and the reinforcer. Kind of like I give these examples of doing certain things in relation to the car, and then they get to play the car. Well, that's in relation to a direct relationship. Anytime that you prompt a child to be successful, enough to be successful, and you reinforce those attempts, it will lead to frequent response reinforcer contingency. And this will eliminate learned helplessness, where they're waiting and prompt dependent on you. Lots of times we incorporate, I said these techniques earlier, I said into a general curriculum to teach maybe a student's individual goals. So for example, you might be teaching letters or numbers or colors within a different activity. So with the cars, you could be teaching numbers with the cars and the colors by using different colored cars. Same with blocks, you could do that. Maybe your snack and they're eating snack and you want to work on counting. You can count within snack and make the reinforcer, the candies, contingent upon the counting. Or working on handwriting. A lot of times, every time the child wants we had this one example that we did where there was a child, and every time he wanted a piece to the cootie game that we were playing, he had to write the name of that piece. So the body part, if you've ever seen the cootie game. And so we were able to work on those body parts within a cootie game. Another example, an activity of cutting. Maybe you have a straight line and you want this individual to learn to cut a straight line. Something of interest the child sees, you can make a line from one point to that object of interest and have the child cut, and then when they get to the end, they get access to it. Let's see, or you might have, another example I've done is I've put like a child like had these toys they were wanting, and I had a bag, and I put them in this bag, and a brown bag, and I drew a line on it, and they cut on the line, and that was their practice for cutting a straight line, and then the bag opened, and then the candy was there. So they were reinforced because there it was, the candy in the bag, and it was a bag that I had other candies in. You could do that when you get a bag of candy at the convenience store, and you can draw a line on that bag, have them cut it. Let's see, I'm trying to get through. Now, I know that I really feel strongly about incidental teaching and the positive effects it has. The difficulties, they're the one, I guess, hard part is that it can be difficult. It's not easy. You need training. You need expertise to oversee. You've got to be creative. You have to be engaged and on target all the time when you're doing this. It involves creativity. Let's see. I know an example. I got creative once when we were playing with these preschool kids in the kitchen, and we were doing pretend play with kitchen stuff, and there was this little like salt and pepper shakers. We went and got real salt and pepper shakers and put them on the little toy table, and filled them, though not with salt and pepper. We filled it with cinnamon, and the child loved the smell of cinnamon, and so that made them desire to pick that up, and then I was able to prompt pretend play actions with it so that, and then they would get to smell it. And so it was, all the materials were part of the reinforcement and part of the activity. Children with autism have restricted interests, and that can be difficult because it makes it fewer things that you can have as potent reinforcement, but you can constantly be conditioning new reinforcers and getting creative on, what's similar to things that you know are reinforcers. It is sometimes difficult that there's infrequent initiations. They're not really, really heavy in the repertoire, especially if a child's been in a discrete trial teaching type of environment a long time. So it's best if you're going to do incidental teaching to really start early on versus coming in and trying to implement it after tons of discrete trial teaching. And there's probably less trials because it's not your primary activity. You've got whatever activity going on, and your actual trial is within that activity. So it's going to be harder to get those repetitions, but since you're doing it across all environments, at all times, naturally, you will be able to get them. But you have to always remember that you get what you teach. And I have to just keep working harder and getting more creative in order to get what I want out of it. Now, in addition to difficulties, we can make errors. We constantly do, but we're always trying to fix the errors that we make. Some examples are using rewards rather than reinforcers, and that means that it's not really helping the behavior. If you're not seeing the change in the behavior, or you're not following the behavior that you're wanting with it, then you're probably not using effective reinforcement. It's just a reward. Prompt dependency, if you don't fade out your prompts in the right time frame, you can see a lot more prompt dependency in the natural environment. And sometimes you might stop a child from getting their own lunch together because you're working on language and joint attention. And so then they might become prompt dependent on you to fix their lunch or their snack. But you're working on some of those other more pivotal skills, and you have to remember that. Sometimes we can make our children angry, like maybe when the item is not enough or the demand is too difficult. And as soon as we see that, we adjust. Nagging, once you teach a skill, a child can realize how easy that is, which is what we want. It's wonderful to have that happen, but once they see that, a child tends to just do it over and over again, and maybe mands over and over and over again repetitively, and you just have to start to fade out to more intermittent reinforcement. And sometimes you forget to give access to the desired item. I've done it plenty of times. I'm in teaching and I set up and arrange it, and then the child does so good and I get excited, and the actual reinforcer that was there, the natural reinforcer, wasn't given. So so we need to make sure that we're always making sure we give access to that. So overall, I hope that this is something you've gotten from this presentation, in this overview, is that there's many reasons that it's beneficial to use incidental teaching. Quality over quantity. You can get the quantity in any type of teaching setting, but the quality of what you're going to get out of a specific learning opportunity is so much more with incidental teaching. More because of generalization, more because of motivation, and a lot of times our behavior challenges are due to the fact that it's not motivating for the child. It's a direct relationship to our reinforcers. So rather than always having to think about, oh, what was the effectiveness of the reinforcer in this discrete trial teaching, you don't have to worry about that as much when you're using incidental teaching because it's there. It's child-led. This reduces the cue dependency and roteness of responses because it isn't a specific target response at a table. It's going to be variable. It's going to be, you're reinforcing approximations. You're allowing for that variety. Engage time really matters. So the more natural the reinforcement, like you naturally encounter, basically more natural reinforcement is like naturally encountering the items, and it's motivating. So rather than doing all these preference assessments before you work on a program, you're going to have your natural preference assessment. Also, for discrete trial teaching, as I said before, you have to program for generalization, and in incidental teaching, it's part of the teaching. Also then you're assured when it's incidental teaching that it's developmentally appropriate activities because it's whatever activity is naturally going on, and it's also very conducive to inclusion type settings, which is what we want overall. So it's really, really a great tool and effective teaching style to use naturalistic incidental teaching. Okay, I think I'm supposed to answer some questions now. I'm going to take some time to look over them if I can figure out how to make this work. Just a moment. Okay. So now I'm going to answer some of these questions that I had received. Somebody had asked, what do you do when the child has little interest, fewer interest? And I don't know if that was asked before I got to that or if I didn't give enough information, but basically our children do have restricted interests. And I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with different techniques for conditioning new reinforcers, but by pairing preferred items or interest with neutral things can gain reinforcing value. So as an example, I had a child that I worked with once in the home, and he loved to play with like a light-up toy that he had. But we were trying to get him into balls, and so what we decided to do is we conditioned a ball, and we chose first one of those balls. I don't know if anybody knows what they are, but they expand and get bigger, and then they reduce down to a smaller ball, and you can like put your head or hands through the web of it. Anyways, we used that at first, and Mom and Dad would sit there in short little increments every night for like 15 minutes and play with this ball while the child was playing with his light-up toy. And they didn't make him play with it, but they played with it right next to him with him while he was playing with the light-up toy. And, you know, they would take turns with the light-up toy and put it inside the ball, and but they didn't place any demands or make him do it or anything. They just made it so much fun looking, and every time he would look at them or show any sign, they would praise, and they would, like, you know, really go all about the light-up toy after that. And by pairing that together over time and not placing demands, after 3 or 4 days of doing this at night for 15 minutes, they saw the child go up to that ball, pick it up, and start playing with it all by himself spontaneously. And that ball ended up becoming another reinforcer that we were able to use. We reinforced strongly. Every time he picked up that ball, we handed him that light-up toy and played with both of them. And over time, it was just as rewarding and reinforcing as the light-up toy. So it's a technique we call conditioning by pairing, and you can definitely, you know, get more training on that. Somebody else asked if I would teach categories. And definitely you can teach categories using incidental teaching. You know, I mean, you could be playing in the kitchen, I was saying, like an example of the pretend play in the kitchen. And there's all kinds of different ways you can sort in categories within that kitchen materials. It's just a matter of trying to watch when the child goes up to something and then prompting them to sort it. And then once he sorts it, then maybe that's the toy, gets to take that and go play with it. Or, you know, he wants that toy, and you, within the pretend play of something in the kitchen, you know, you're like, oh, we need to wash it. Let's wash all the plates. And you have them go and find all the plates and then go in there and wash it and play in the sink. So that's ways that you have to get creative, but it can be done. Somebody else asked about training parents and how can you get training. And I would say you would want to have training from experience from a BCBA, a Board Certified Behavior Analyst, but you would want to contact Board Certified Behavior Analysts and make sure that, you know, that they could do parent training, and in addition that they can do they have expertise or they can train in incidental teaching techniques, pivotal response treatment. Because you just want to make sure that they have that expertise, because not everybody is trained in the same areas. In terms of affordable, I think that varies for, you know, everyone, what affordable is and what that means. But usually there are training programs that you can do online. There's places you can get help by videotaping in your home and sending off to a BCBA. So there's lots of different ways, and you could probably contact the Johnson Center as well, and they would be able to direct you further on ways that they can help you. Then the last question I got was to elaborate a little more on the rewards versus positive reinforcement. What I mean by that is that in order for something to be positive reinforcement, it's got to have the right effect on the behavior and increase the behavior. So, lots of times a teacher might in a classroom have a reward system, and there's, they tell me this reward system does not work for this child. Like, we have all these tickets and they can go to the treasure chest, but this kid doesn't care, and he is not, he is constantly not earning tickets because he is non-compliant. And usually what we're talking about there is that those rewards are not actually reinforcing to that child. So in the teacher's mind, they seem like rewards. But what's reinforcing to one person can be very different than what's reinforcing to another person. Or even something that's reinforcing to my behavior today might not be reinforcing certain behavior tomorrow because of different variables. And so you want to be taking the data on behavior to see that it's having the positive effect that you're wanting it to have. And that's how you know it's positive reinforcement. So always in incidental teaching, if you find that the behavior is not changing or improving, then you want to look to, well, is this really effective reinforcement or not? And that's usually the first place that we would start. I think that is it. I'm going to check one more time and see if there's, oh, we're already past our time. I think that covered all the questions I got. Thank you very much.